The Kansai region of Japan is made up of the prefectures of Nara, Wakayama, Kyoto, Osaka, Hyogo, Shiga, and Mie. This area is known as the cultural heart and historical center of Japan. It also has a rich supernatural history, with many parts of the Kansai region having a very dark past. This evening, we are joined by Phillip Jackson, author of Paranormal Kansai, to dive deeper into some haunted tales from the past. Supernatural Japan, Episode 4, Paranormal Kansai with Phillip Jackson. So welcome back to another episode of Supernatural Japan. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I am the host of this weekly podcast about all things supernatural, paranormal, creepy, spooky, and weird Japan. And I want to first of all thank all of the new listeners out there who have joined the Supernatural Japan podcast. Thank you so much for downloading, for listening, and becoming part of this really cool new community. I really appreciate it. Now, before we jump into this week's episode, which is an interview with author Phillip Jackson, I just want to let you know beforehand that the audio in this week's episode is not perfect. We had some technological glitches, some bumps in the road here and there during the episode, but since it took Phillip and I a few weeks and a few different attempts over those few weeks to get this interview done, I really wanted to share it with you because it is a fantastic interview. So again, it's not perfect sound-wise, but the content is fantastic, and it really is a great interview because Phillip is such a fantastic writer, storyteller, and he's really knowledgeable about the topic of paranormal things in Japan. And so it was a real honor to have him come on the podcast, and it's really cool that I know he will be on future episodes of the podcast. So without any further ado, let's get into our discussion with Phillip Jackson, the author of Paranormal Kansai. Supernatural Japan listeners, thank you so much for tuning back in for episode number 4 of the podcast. And I'm very thrilled this evening to be chatting with Japan-based author Phillip Jackson. Phillip, welcome to the Supernatural Japan podcast.
Hi, good evening, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, of course, you are known for your books, The Hidden Paths, Walking Historical Kyoto. And this evening, you're here on the podcast to talk a little bit about Paranormal Kansai. And we're going to get into that in a few moments. But before we jump into the books you've written and the ghostly research you've done here in Japan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you find yourself in Japan?
Sure. Well, I'm originally from the UK. Grew up in North England. Spent a good portion of my adult life in London, which is where I met my Japanese wife, which is how I ended up in Japan. And we spent some time in Japan, back to the UK and backwards and forwards. And 10 years ago, finally decided we had to make a decision, UK or Japan, and weighed up all the pros and cons. And I've been settled here now since, the last 10 years. So that's the short story of how I got here, basically.
Nice. And you're based in Kyoto, aren't you?
Yes, Kyoto, in Uji City, Kyoto.
Okay, so that is, for those who are unfamiliar with the geography, is that, can I assume, a smaller city outside of, or in Kyoto? It's not a prefecture, is it? It's Kyoto's got a special status, right? But that's not outside of the main city, like Kyoto City.
I think Kyoto just sees itself as special, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, that's what people from other parts of Japan grumble about.
Yeah. But basically, Uji City is about 25 minutes on the train on the Nara line from Kyoto main station.
Oh, okay.
So it's a lot of people who come to Kyoto, they go to Fushimi Inari, the red body that go up in the mountain, and I'm just a little bit further south from there. If any of listeners are aware of Kyoto animation, where I am.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So tonight, you're here to talk about Paranormal Kansai, but before that, you had written Hidden Paths, Walking Historical Kyoto. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the genesis of that book. How did Hidden Paths come about?
Yeah, sure. Well, on the Hidden Paths Walking Historical Kyoto website, there's a blog post which basically explains how it started. And the first paragraph of that blog is it all began with walked by particularly imposing the statue many times. I finally asked, who is he? And it was basically that question that sparked the idea of putting together the series. The statue was of an 18th century imperialist called Takayama Hikokodo, who would eventually in 1793 commit seppuku in an act of defiance against the Tokugawa shogunate. And the statue is by Sanjo Bridge in Kyoto in the center. And around that area, you've got blade cut marks on one of the nails on the bridge itself from a clash at the Ikatake incident in 1864, which involved the Shinsengumi, the assassination site, one of which is the site where the famous revolutionary Sakamoto Daimon was killed. And putting these sites and others together, sites, many of which were being overlooked by crowds of people that were walking around there, it was quite easy to start laying out that walking route, and that became the first one, and then adding more around the area, and spreading out further and further in other areas of Kyoto that I went to. But that wasn't actually the first walking route that I put together. The first one I ever did was when I was in London in 2008, and
Okay.
I put together a route for an American company that was planning to build an app of walking routes. And this particular one covered a route around Highgate in North London, which was in the childhood home of Peter Sellers. There was a haunted pub in there, and also the site of a burial grave from the plague and other places like that.
Okay.
But Hidden Paths all started with Takayama Hikokudo.
Okay. Nice. So that's cool. I mean, when I think about it, I myself am completely guilty of any time I've been to Kyoto of only being on the very, very, very well trodden paths. Those urban paths where there's just throngs of tourists until COVID happened, of course. I think about just before we pulled the plug, my family and I, and decided to leave Japan. Back in 2017, we moved to China, to Beijing, for me to continue my education career. And we tried to go to Kyoto. Well, we did go to Kyoto, but I remember our failed attempt at getting up to Kiyomizu-dera with my two young children because it was just absolutely so clogged and congested with tourists, just like wall to wall, like being at a championship football match or a concert, trying to move up the road, the main road up to Kiyomizu-dera, that we actually gave up partway through because my 4-year-old daughter started crying and having a panic attack, and we gave up. That was kind of my visions of Kyoto in the last, say, pre-pandemic, the last 5 or 6 years. It was just getting more and more. Again, those well-beaten paths were very well beaten. So it's fantastic having a source of a guided source to get you off of those places. Yeah,
but I mean, in all honesty, it's not surprising that everybody goes to the same places. You pick up or you look at a website or a tour operator site, and all of them in the same places.
Yeah.
The first time I came to Kyoto, which was 1998, and I went to Fushimi Inari. I went to those places.
Yeah.
And then the second time I came back, I wanted to go somewhere different. And you look in the books and it's just small places. But it was fortunate that I knew people, my wife. So we ended up going to different ones in the country from there. And there really is a lot of places to be in Kyoto.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's, yeah, no. And, in the future, when we're back in Japan traveling or living, I definitely am looking forward to exploring, again, those off the beaten paths with your book in hand, or on my iPhone or whatever it may be. So before we jump into talking about Paranormal Kansai, for those who may not be super familiar with this part of Japan, or the part of Japan that you write about, what is the Kansai, or what does Kansai mean, or what is the Kansai region?
To be brief, the Kansai region is an area of West Central and on the main island of Honshu, which takes in 7 prefectures: Kyoto, Hyogo, Shiga, Mie, Wakayama, Nara. Interestingly, it's got more World Heritage sites than any other part of paranormal aspect. Nara, in particular, has a lot of very interesting megaliths.
Okay.
And actually the TV show, which I'm sure you're aware of, Ancient Aliens, they actually came to Nara a few years ago and went around some of these places. But basically, it's a large area taken in 7 prefectures in West Central.
Nice. And your book Paranormal Kansai is divided into those prefectures, which is a great segue into you telling us about Paranormal Kansai. Can you tell us a little bit about why you wrote this book? And just tell us about Paranormal Kansai. We'd like to know more.
As far as paranormal in itself, and I've always been interested in unexplained, whether it's stories, cosmology, UFOs, or just strange, weird things. Growing up in North England, in Lincolnshire, in the countryside, I grew up in a village. There was, plenty of old farm buildings, and as I think it was probably about 8 or 9 years old, my brother and I, we decided that all these buildings were obviously haunted. Put ourselves a copy of Peter Underwood's Ghost Hunter guidebook.
Nice.
That started us off, basically. But with the Paranormal Kansai, it wasn't something that, I've never gone out ghost hunting or anything like that. But when I was putting the Hidden Paths route together, I was coming across locations that had, stories connected to them that may have a folklore background, a story to them, or some paranormal aspect. And I was getting enough stories to be able to put pages together for Kyoto.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, why not expand it on site? It was during the COVID period, so I couldn't get out and about with regard to putting more walking routes together. So I basically sat down with what I had in Kyoto and places I'd been to in Osaka, and started researching other places in Kansai. So so Paranormal Kansai is it doesn't have walking route in the same way that Hidden Paths has a walking route. So it's kind of a companion book to the Hidden Paths book. But you could take some of the locations out into the walk, or as one reader actually said to me, comes over to visit Japan next time, he's going to take around and get to as many locations in the area where he is as he possibly can. So that's how the book came about. Just expanding on the Hidden Path series, really.
Yeah, I suppose, when you're doing any kind of historical research into pretty much any location in Japan, you're probably going to come across some interesting tales of this type. That's one thing that I've been personally meaning to do at some point, just because of the fact that I spent 10 years living in Kobe and I really love Kobe so much. I would love to unearth a little bit of the ghostly path or ghostly history of Kobe. I'd just like to know some stories because I really don't know any. So that's something that I think I haven't really come across anything on the English internet. So I may have to rely on the assistance of my Japanese wife to help me out with that. And I'm sure that the Japanese internet would have some available history and tales and things out there for me to kind of explore. But yeah, so, we're here talking tonight about the book Paranormal Kansai, and you've got a lot of really fascinating stories to share. There's a lot in the book, and I know that pre-show you mentioned that you've got some interesting World War II era type stories and some other ones as well. And we've got lots of time to listen to them. Okay. So I would love to, and I know the Supernatural Japan podcast listeners would love to hear some different tales from the Kansai region.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you mentioned World War II, but when people think of paranormal stories, I think the first thing that tends to come to mind are either folktale creatures, Oni, demons, more modern hardcore style encounters, or romanticized samurai ghosts. These stories are great. We do tend to forget the period during the war when there was such a huge loss of life that it would be surprising if there were no paranormal stories. Kyoto actually was pretty much unscathed, but Osaka was, heavily firebombed towards the end of the war. One location in particular, a park in the center of Osaka on June 7th, 1945. There was a private factory and houses were burned and destroyed by a US bombing raid. And the attack began in the morning. Civilians and workers hurried to evacuate. They went to Shirokita Park on the south bank of Yuro River. A nearby textile factory was also struck by a bomb. Young women who were working there were actually not from gathered at the park to escape. Everybody was thinking that staying in the park, it was going to be a safe place. But basically what happened next in described as probably one of the most indiscriminate and horrific attacks of the war. US aircraft came back and strafed the evacuees, more than 1,000 people. And the dead, they were taken to Jozenji Temple, and the bodies were laid in the main hall, out in the garden. There were so many bodies, they couldn't get them all in the main hall. And the corpses of the men, women, and children were taken down to the Yodo River, down to the embankment. They were oiled, they were cremated. Ceremonies were conducted for them, and apparently there was so many that the process had all continued for quite a few days. Today, there are memorials, and one of the memorials actually in the park is called the Seninzuka, 1,000 people mound. And witnesses have reported light orbs during the early hours of the morning around the Seninzuka. Not just one or two orbs, but a lot of light orbs moving around there. You sometimes, it's a common thing, paranormal ghost photography, where you or a lot of people, image of whether it is, whether it isn't. We can safely have an answer for that one. But it is obviously a little bit strange if you're one of these witnesses who's standing in the park, and it's nighttime and white lights are flashing around. Obviously, that's not on the camera, so it's a different story in that case.
Yeah.
But there's also been a sighting of a ghostly figure wearing an air defense hood.
Okay.
A protection, sort of like it's more like a light cushion that falls over the head, which a lot of the evacuees on that day would have been wearing, which is, very, very strange.
Wow. Yeah. That's a really tragic story. And, I remember when I read that story in Paranormal Kansai, and I can remember quickly getting on Google Maps and searching for the park and realizing that it's I think an area I've been in before. Back in like 2008, I ran the Yodogawa Marathon, and I'm pretty sure at the time it started around that area. It may have started at that park.
It's a very it's a very well kept scenic park. So lots of people go there. It's a well known place.
And again, one of those places where I think I've been there actually, but of course, not knowing anything about the past. It's just like it's a park where I'm pretty sure I started a marathon, and that's it. Right. But when you read something like that,
it is strange when I've, like yourself, I've been to places where you find out later that something happened. And when you're there and you've got no idea of it, nothing enters your mind relating to it at all. When you're in a location where something happened, you take a moment, pause for thought, and there and really think about it.
Exactly. I was just going to say, like in the episode 1 of this podcast with the Senichi department store fire, I've been to that area in Namba, the current Big Camera. I've been in Big Camera. I've been shopping in Big Camera, window shopping in Big Camera, but I did not know about the past at the time. Had no idea that there had been a department store there, a fire, all of this. And that's something I mentioned in the podcast, and I've mentioned to you too. I think, the next time I go there, because, my wife is from Osaka, whenever we go back to Japan, next time we head back, we're going to be based there because that's where my in-laws live. I'm going to be going back there and really looking at that area through a different lens for sure.
Well, I visited the Senichi department, the Big Camera store as it is now, just over a year ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I think over a year ago I went there, and it was pretty busy. But I was walking through there knowing the history.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered how many other people were aware of the history. Like, as you explained in the first episode of the podcast, the elevator wasn't working, and also voices had been heard that in modern times voices had been heard. The mixed with the music in the elevator, you're going up and down. But the elevator, I don't know if where the elevator now is where it was back in the day. They could well have to a different part when the top has been totally reformed.
Yeah,
the elevator up to the 5th floor, thinking, no music. They've taken the music out.
Yeah, there's no elevator music in this elevator anymore, and you realize that they haven't used elevator music in quite some time, probably.
Yeah, it was absolute silence in the elevator.
Okay.
So what I did do, went back down and went back up again. But the second time I was going up, I took a recording on my cell phone recorder and listened back to it later.
Okay.
Obviously, it was silence, but it was just that curiosity. I kind of, I was pretty sure there was going to be nothing on there, but it was just that.
Are you going to be able to pick up some kind of EVP?
Yeah.
Nice.
No, in some ways, I was quite pleased that nothing
that you didn't. Okay. Wow. So I was wondering, what are some other of the more fascinating tales in the area that you'd like to share?
Thinking about the World War II, one thing which I found quite interesting looking into recently, not all of them have paranormal stories, are the underground facilities that the Japanese started building towards the end of the war. They knew that the end was coming, and a lot of the military sites on land would be bombed, so they had to take things on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
There's a large one in Okinawa. There's one, I believe, in Nagano area, I believe it is, where they actually were building a place for the imperial family to live as well. Although apparently the emperor didn't want it down because he would see it as if the people knew that he was, for all intents and purposes, running away. They would see it as the end. So apparently he didn't want to take shelter.
Okay.
But also there's one in Osaka, which is called, and it's in Takatsuki City in Osaka. It's a group of about 30 tunnels, and they started building that towards the end of 1944. And the aim was to relocate the military command post from Osaka Castle. And the Kawasaki aircraft factory in Hyogo was bombed in 1945. So the purpose then changed to turn the underground facility into a factory for manufacturing parts. And they were due to have that operational by August 1945, but obviously that never came around. Now, the site where the tunnel is underground, site above ground, is private land. You can't just go there and concrete factory, a concrete manufacturing land. You can't just go walking into their land and looking for the entrance. There is a community preservation group which was set up in 1990 to conserve the tunnels, and they do lead groups down there from time to time. And they do occasionally post things online, photographs when they've been down there. But during the construction of the tunnels, there were even accidents and obviously fatalities. Workers that were digging the tunnels. And people that have been down there in more recent years, they've reported paranormal encounters in the tunnel, seeing, basically seeing other people or other figures down there.
Okay.
When there should be nobody else down there except their small group.
Yeah.
And there was also Japanese soldiers were posted there, and some witnesses that have been down there have basically come back with reports of British soldiers. Obviously, they've come across a figure walking ahead in the tunnel, dressed as a Second World War period soldier in the uniform, and also taking photographs down there. And when they check the photographs later, there's more people than they took down with them. So there's obviously some strangeness going on down there, actually. But I mean, there is one facility in Kyoto, not far from where I am now, in a place called Obaku,
Okay.
which is Uji as well. And it was I think it was maybe a storage, ammunition storage, and you can go up to it, and there's the tunnel entrance. It's basically page 8 into it, and sign next to it saying what it was, but obviously you can't go into it. And behind it there is a park and a hill, but I don't know how far back that one particularly goes. But it would be interesting to get inside there and see what that one's so close to where I am. But yeah, it's quite interesting of finding ghosts underground.
Yeah, well, I mean, there seems to be, I mean, you're talking these underground tunnels that are connected to these World War II facilities. And one thing that I found interesting in the book, Paranormal Kansai, and maybe we can have you on in a future episode to kind of a theme about it, but tunnels in general. And I know it's not just in the Kansai, but in other parts of Japan as well. There seems to be a lot of paranormal activity in tunnels. And, it seems like some of these tunnels in the Kansai region, like Ikoma Tunnel and other tunnels, have seen quite a bit of tragedy and accidents and fatalities happen through traffic, train collisions, train accidents, other things. So tunnels are a very interesting place in Japan's kind of paranormal and supernatural DNA, I suppose.
Well, I've said this before to a couple of people that when it comes to ghost stories, the difference between the UK and Japan for me is generally, if you're in the UK, you say to somebody, oh, you see that pub over there, it's haunted. Whereas in Japan, you would say, well, you see that tunnel over there, it's haunted.
Okay.
It pretty much, it pretty much is that. Fellow Japanese podcasters, Joe and Casey, who do the Ishikawa Summit Sea, we had a chat about Ishikawa. And they, as intrepid explorers, ghost hunters, got in their car and they went off to basically explore one of the haunted tunnels in Ishikawa. They set off. It's quite an interesting story. They didn't get they didn't get as far as they were hoping to get, but it was quite brave of them to just pile into the car and drive off into the unknown to check out this haunted tunnel that I told them.
Nice. I'm going to have to go back into their catalog and find that episode. I haven't heard it, but I am subscribed to Ishikawa Summit to See, so I will be going back and searching for that. It sounds entertaining. Those are two entertaining podcast hosts for sure. Okay. So are there some other, you did mention, now here's one story in your book that really, I would have to say the story that probably left the biggest chill up my spine and had my hairs all standing up in ways I don't want my hairs to stand up would have to be the Nakagawara Beach incident. And that one, I get shivers just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's pretty tragic as well. And although it happened in 1955, it does connect to the wartime stories as well. Basically, July 28th, 1955, the Kyohoku Middle School, they began their swimming practice at Nakagawara Beach. Yeah. Seemed nothing untoward. It was going to be a normal swimming lesson. They had around 100 students and instructors altogether. They went off into the water. They had a designated area that had been checked for safety. The tides had been confirmed. The water was only 1 meter deep. It was shallow enough to stand. It was deep enough to swim. The weather was good. They really didn't, there was just nothing different from any other time. And it was only when they'd been in the water a short time when one of the teachers noticed a white line approaching from the ocean, which it looked like a wave, but it quickly disappeared before reaching them. And it was then noted that the children and the teachers seemed to be struggling, having difficulty basically staying above the water surface, and there were shouts for help went out, and one of the other teachers that were on the beach, they raced in to help them get out of the water. But by the time the rescuers had reached them, many of them had already drowned. Tragically, it was a children's school lesson. One of those in the water who did come out, she said afterwards that it was as if their legs were simply not working, paralyzed. And those that could be reached and pulled to the beach, some of them were in a kind of chronic state. A wall swimmer was said to be clipping a white hat. Now, this is a very strange part of it, which we'll come to in a second. But nobody had been wearing a hat. But also many of the victims, after reaching hospital, either at hospital or on the way, because they swallowed some of water. Investigations followed, obviously. The school principal, he was convicted and given a year in prison. Any cause really put it down to that the school they hadn't checked everything. Otherwise, nothing would have gone wrong. But there was no conclusive evidence, no reason given for the accident. few put ideas forward. Apparently, there'd been a typhoon earlier in the week, and they thought maybe water and saltwater layers, which would affect different tide currents and things like that, making it difficult for swimming. But the other investigators kind of ruled out. They talked about a sudden wave that could have come along, and they mentioned the wave-like line that they'd seen beforehand. But again, there was no evidence that could have, really, and it was eventually left as a bit of an unsolved tragedy. But several years later, a witness came forward, and the actual witness was one of the survivors. What is really, really doing. She stated that she'd swum out to the designated area without any problems when her friend, who was next to her, pointed to a line of people who were in white hats, white headgear, approaching from the ocean, which was the white line that people had seen from the beach. He said that these people in the water wearing the headgear then went under the water, and then everybody started to panic. They felt like they were being grabbed, their legs. They said they saw hands grabbing onto their legs and pulling them down. They said also some of them also said that in faces in the water. This was from other witnesses that came forward. Initial witness, she was going to back off, and then other witnesses, survivors, came forward to pick it up. Then after this investigation, after the witnesses came forward, they looked at the history of the location, and they found, another. This is where the tragic connection comes to it.
Okay.
And the real mystery to it, because 10 years earlier, during World War II, in that area, Suemir, over 1,500 had been in air raids. And because of the overwhelming number of bodies were buried at sea, that have been given official information, the air raids had begun on March 12, 1945, and ended on July 28th, 1945, which was exactly 10 years prior to the date of the drowning incident, which was on July 28th, 1945. It was also revealed that the white hat that one of the swimmers had held onto during her rescue was the safety headgear used by soldiers in the war, and that many casualties were able to be wearing. So it's a really weird one there. Those, the headgear, the date, 10-year anniversary that it happened. Yeah. I'd love to know what happened to that headgear. I really would. What happened to it?
There's a lot of strange connections. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm feeling those chills now, actually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that in your book, you've got pictures or sketches of that headgear.
Yeah, I'd really love to know what happened to that headgear. And I've done numerous online searches to see if I can find any news reports. I found news reports from the time, which describe what happened in the court proceeding, and things like that. But I can't find any later news reports, followed up or anything like that. So if anybody listens to this episode and they know what happened to that headgear, please get in touch.
Get in touch with Phil. He'd like to know. We'd all like to know. Maybe somewhere in dusty old boxes in a storage closet of some old police station or something.
It's like the scene from an Indiana Jones movie, isn't it? Where there's a warehouse full of all these bodies.
Yeah, exactly. There's some kind of warehouse with all these paranormal and mysterious objects in Japan, and yeah. Wow, that is a spooky one for sure. And you guys, if you get yourselves a copy of Paranormal Kansai, you can read that too. Wow. So I don't want to keep you much longer, Philip. It's been great talking to you, and I really appreciate you handing us over so much time on a Saturday evening.
That's totally fine.
for the Supernatural Japan podcast listeners and myself. If people are curious about, first of all, finding your books online and getting their hands on them, how could they do that?
Well, one place to go is the Hidden Paths website, which is www.hiddenpaths.com. And that website has details of all the books, Hidden Paths books, Paranormal Kansai. There's a page of which has got a lot of photographs and location descriptions, some which are not in the book, some which are in the book. And further on that, it's got some videos that tells about walking tours. If anybody wants to tour around Kyoto to a particular area that's not in the books, or they find somewhere in the book they want to do, then that's possible as well. The books are available from Amazon, from all regions, digital download or paper. Nice. So the website or Amazon basically.
Awesome. So that's hiddenpaths.com.
Hidden Paths Kyoto.
Oh, hiddenpathskyoto.com and Amazon, of course. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. And again, you've got the paper version, the digital Kindle versions, all that goodness. Yeah. If people want to reach out to you or find out where you are online, how can they follow you and see what you're up to?
Well, there is through the website, people can send messages. Okay. There is a contact page on the website. If anybody wants to get in touch via Twitter, they can find me at P. Jackson Music. And there's also a Hidden Path Walking Historical Facebook page as well. I'm always happy to hear from people. If anyone's got their own paranormal story, please share it, especially if it's Kansai.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing we all want to hear more about. Yeah, no, definitely. And what I like about your stories, and this is something we've conversed about in the past, is that, and it was in episode 2 of the podcast where I chatted with Rich, the middle-aged expat who went up to Bibai in Hokkaido. There's a lot of, we talked about these top 10 lists that you find, like when you type in like Hauntings Japan or Ghost Japan. Yeah. There's always the suicide forest and this and that, these kind of same places. And what I really like about your research into your book is that these are not the kind of top 10 list places.
Yeah, I mean, one of the stories in the Kyoto, which is called Restless Spirits in a Restaurant. Okay. It was a paranormal encounter that actually happened to a friend of mine.
Oh wow.
Where he was working in the restaurant where it happened.
Okay.
And basically, he was hearing strange noises upstairs on the second floor. But nobody ever went up to the second floor, and he described it. One night, it was crazy. It sounded like children were running around upstairs. So there was some stairs up the back. He went out behind the building and decided to see what was going on. Mm-hmm. As I said, this was a restaurant. And as he was going up the stairs, he put a shout from behind, which was one of the other members of the staff. Rate, fuming, shouting him down, saying, "No, you don't go up." Obviously, in Indonesia, and basically, this guy said, "It's a different world up there. It's a different world." One of his friends who was working there explained to him and what they meant by world. And apparently, after he left, he heard from his friend who was still working there that the owner of the restaurant did come in and do, should we say, certain ceremonies of a religious nature.
Okay.
To quell what was ever running around upstairs.
Wow.
So sometimes the stories come from people. My friend in that case, I was talking about this project. He said, "Oh, I've got a story for you."
Wow. It's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Especially when you're hearing it from someone you know.
Yeah. When it's someone you know and trust.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you meet from, when you hear these tales from people who are I don't know. I don't want to use air quotes, credible people, but you have people who maybe have the type of personality where they embellish things. They like attention. They like to kind of be outlandish. And then you have the people who are very much not that way. And then when you hear tales or experiences that are really out of the ordinary from them, it kind of leaves you pause.
Yeah. I mean, somebody asked me, have you ever seen a ghost? And my answer was, I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Because I don't like to jump to conclusions or just assume, something that happened in a particular place can't be. Sometimes it's best to leave it unexplained.
Yeah, exactly. I think I am of the same feelings. If people said to me, "Have you seen a ghost?" I would say, "No, I haven't seen a ghost, but I may have had some interesting experiences in the past that left me uncomfortable and not sure what had happened." Maybe not quite like your friend in that restaurant, but yeah. So it's such a fascinating topic, which is why I now have a podcast about it. So Philip, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Again, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed talking about it with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And for all of you out there listening, go to those links that we mentioned. They'll be in the show notes of the podcast for sure. I'll share them over on the Supernatural Japan Facebook group. I'll share them over on Instagram. And Philip, you're always welcome to come back on the podcast. And we look forward to having you here again in the future.
That'd be great. I'm happy to come on anytime. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you so much, Phillip Jackson, for taking the time to stop by the Supernatural Japan podcast and share these great tales with us and to share your background and your experiences with us as well. Now, remember, everyone, you can find all of Philip's work over at hiddenpathskyoto.com. That's hiddenpathskyoto.com, where you can find his Hidden Paths Kyoto walking tour books, as well as Paranormal Kansai. And like he mentioned in the interview, of course, you can go over to Amazon and you can buy the paper version of his books, or you can download the Kindle versions. I myself have the Kindle version of Paranormal Kansai. I've read it several times myself. I know my son has read it as well, and I've really enjoyed it, and I really recommend that book to anyone who is interested in this topic for sure. Now, of course, I encourage all of you to go over and join the Facebook group for this podcast, where we share a lot of cool things about the different episodes, lots of photos, links, information, and just other things throughout the week. And that's over at facebook.com/groups/Supernatural Japan. And I'll be happy to let you in and join that growing community. And of course, you can follow us on Instagram at instagram.com/Supernatural Japan. And you can find me on Twitter at Mad4Maple, and I tweet about a lot of different things over there, some supernatural and a lot of things that aren't supernatural. Now, of course, I would really appreciate it if you could help the Supernatural Japan podcast grow, and you can do that by leaving a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, well, that does it for another episode of the Supernatural Japan podcast. My name is Kevin O'Shea. I am your host, bringing the weird, the spooky, the creepy, and all of that of Japan to you each and every week. I appreciate you listening, and wherever you are in the world, hope you're happy, hope you're healthy, and I hope you're keeping things spooky.